Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I got into real estate investing back in 2015. I bought a condo in San Jose, California for about $700,000. And that property, we were gonna use it as a short-term rental. And right when we closed escrow, it was in an HOA development and they banned short-term rentals. So at that point, we had a property that was fully furnished and we had to pivot. What we did was we turned it into a fully furnished rental for executives. We did that for several years. It was a great business model. Everybody that we had in that property were either tech executives, traveling doctors, nurses. They would stay typically for about a year. Some stayed for about 2 years. And it was a great business model. We didn't make a ton of cash flow, honestly. We pretty much broke even. However, on that property, we bought it for $700,000. And when we sold it for $1.150 in 2022. So we did really good on that. Now, during that time, that was 2015. And in Silicon Valley, San Jose area, the market was flying off the handle. Interest rates were low. So, I really wanted to continue to invest in real estate, but I was getting priced out and I wanted to continue to invest. And one day I just stumbled upon some Bigger Pockets videos and started watching them and learned that I could, invest out of state. And, they had a website and different YouTubes on how to invest and how to get your team together. And I felt like I had a leg up on most new investors because I was a realtor and I had an investment property and I knew how to, look at a neighborhood, pull comps, manage a rehab team because I've done that before. I really wasn't nervous to jump into a market away from where I live. So what I did was I ended up going out to a Bigger Pockets conference. And at that same time, I was talking to an agent out in Detroit and I was talking to an agent in Kansas City. We got together, I started analyzing deals, and then what happened was I ended up at the Bigger Pockets conference and I literally closed on my first property in Detroit. And then after that conference, I jumped on a plane and flew to Kansas City, walked a property, and then bought my first deal out in Kansas City. If I have to look back on how everything kind of transpired, I would tell you that what I took on was absolutely insane. And I don't know if I would recommend it for your first investment out of state, because what I did was, it was crazy. And now that I look back, it's even more crazier. Here's one of the biggest keys to it all. The property in Detroit I bought for $37,000. I paid cash, okay? I had no mortgage on it. The property was in pretty good shape. I did some painting, some light cosmetic work on the property. The day we put it on the rental market, that night it got broken into. They threw a brick through the back window. They came in, they stole the water heater. Property manager says, hey, they're gonna come back and they're probably gonna steal more things and they're probably gonna do it tonight. Sure enough, they came back, broke through the front door and then tried to get something, but got spooked and then left. I had it tenant occupied within a couple months. That tenant was paying $950 a month and we were off to the races. I then, after about 3-4 months, I ended up doing a cash out refinance and put a loan on it. And my payment was $330. I mean, it was less than a car payment. So it was definitely manageable. And the reason why I did that was I knew that I was going to have issues. And so in my head, it was going, okay, if I get a squatter, if I have to deal with an eviction, whatever the case may be, I knew my overhead was really low. And I did that on purpose. Now, switching over to the Kansas City scenario, that property was a full gut to the studs rehab. Why I took on such a big project out there, I have no clue. I ended up getting a hard money loan on that property, learned right off the bat that, hey, I can put down X amount of dollars in a down payment and then get the construction rehab money from the lender. That was a huge light bulb moment right then and there. One thing I learned in the very beginning is that just because a contractor is cheap doesn't mean it's a good scenario. I got 3 bids and I went with the lowest bid. It worked out on that property. The timeline was blown by a couple months, but it worked out. So I had the property in Kansas City going, working through the rehab, learning as I'm going, making all these decisions. And then in Detroit, that property is stabilized. I'm bringing home about $500 a month in cash flow. Cool. COVID kicks in, things go sideways. At that point, I ended up buying another property in an area close to the other Detroit property in this neighborhood called Harper Woods. And bought that property, got the tenant put in place, paid $50,000 for that one. Tenant moves in, COVID is going crazy. That tenant stops paying. Property manager doesn't alert me about this, starts charging this tenant late fees. And just some random day, I get this phone call from this guy. And the first thing he says to me is he calls out my name, my wife's name, my daughter's name, my address, and says, I know what you're doing out in Harper Woods. And I'm thinking he's some guy trying to buy my property. And he says, look, you better stop what you're doing, else I'm going to burn your fucking house down. And I said, hey, I think you got the wrong person. He's like, no, I don't have the wrong person. So we exchanged some text messages back and forth, and I knew right away that this guy meant business. And I knew that he probably would burn my house down. So I called the property manager, I let them know, and they thought it was no big deal. And I go, look, this guy's gonna burn my house down. And I go, and have you seen some of the houses in that neighborhood? They're burned down. I don't think this guy's playing. So welcome to investing out in Detroit and Harper Woods. This is the start of it. The key to it all is you got an issue, you get somebody to solve it. You don't sit back and stress out. I know it's sometimes they're bigger issues and some are smaller, but the fact is you have to have a good enough database that you can call people to just handle your things, and you have to do it fast and quick and move on. The Harper Woods property, once that tenant got back on place, things were kind of crazy during COVID. There was landlord assistant programs where you can, get money. There was money for the tenants as well. So we made it through that. And at that point, the tenant in the first house, the Detroit house, decided that she was going to move out. And that's where all the problems started. At that point, I hired a contractor and he did some work. I never got photos from him. He seemed like a really good guy. I was trustworthy. He wanted to move his brother in, who was also a subcontractor. And, he's like, hey, he's a subcontractor. He'll take care of your property. Well, that didn't work out. He stopped paying. And then from then on, all I had was evictions, squatters, things getting stolen, you name it, everything was happening on that property. I couldn't get it under control. That was the big thing. And the one thing that I've learned now, when I look back at that time period in the market and what I was going through, is when you hire people, whoever that is, your contractor, property manager, handyman, anything, you also want to have at least 2 to 3 other vendors in your list. So 3 contractors, 3 property managers. And when you're dealing with contractors, if they're doing work for you, you need to have somebody on the ground that every week stops by the property, maybe on Friday, casually stops by, walks the property, and what your contractor has told you they have done, you have that person who has real estate knowledge walk the property and verify. That property in Detroit, I ended up selling it, so got rid of it. At the same time that I'm going through selling that property, I'd already scaled a portfolio out in Kansas City. We ended up at about 21 doors in Kansas City, all fixer-uppers, where we basically went in there, did complete rehabs, and then did BRRRR deals. So we basically bought them, rehabbed them, rented them, refinanced them, and put a tenant in place, took our cash out, and moved on. It was a crazy time period. We're still in COVID and we're going through all these things, but the rates were really low. So the money was cheap. It was easy to do these projects, and it was appreciating. Lots of lessons learned during that time period. The biggest takeaway of those first initial properties were that I took action, okay? I learned, I put systems in place, and I kept moving forward. Like, those are the keys. A lot of work and a lot of ups and downs, and that's okay. All right, so then time went on in Kansas City, and one thing I did really realize really quick was I had a much better team on the ground in Kansas City. And so I put more effort into Kansas City. I stopped buying properties in Detroit and Harper Woods. I left that alone because, quite frankly, I wasn't getting the right team around me, and I can tell that it would just cause me more issues, and I was already having issues. Really put the focus into Kansas City, kept buying properties, started buying some multi-units, and then our final property, what we turned into a midterm rental. It was a duplex that we rehabbed in a really cool location over in Westport. So we finished that whole build out, and at that point we were going into 2023. Rates were going up. We had to do a couple of refinances, ran into a little bit of problem there, but for the most part we made it through, and we have not been buying any more properties in Kansas City since that time period. 2022, I bought a cabin out in the Smoky Mountains. I'm also in the Seattle, Washington market, and I'm developing out there. And that's what we've been doing for the last year and a couple months. And that's really where all my focus is. I am trying not to, honestly, I don't even want to do short-term rentals anymore. I don't want to buy long-term rentals in the Midwest. I'm only focusing in Seattle. However, the biggest takeaway of this all for anybody who is new is you have to start somewhere. Okay? You don't need to buy, a huge apartment complex or do all these crazy, sexy things you hear online. You can start small, something that you're comfortable with, and then build from there. And you just really don't know where your journey is going to go. The key thing is you got to start, because I started off a $30,000 property in the Midwest, but look where it's taken me today. We have a pretty big portfolio of properties. We've done a lot of different strategies, and now we're developing out in Seattle. See that there was a progression there. Come back and start breaking down all the different scenarios, like how to deal with a contractor, property manager, all these different things that I've gone through. But this is pretty much my story of investing right now, for the most part. There's definitely plenty of stories. So thanks again for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one.